Okay, if you'll go back and review your sheet there for just a second, we're on actually on step number 4. We're going to assemble the incubator, and we start with the blue base. Remember the blue base from earlier? Of course, the blue base is the foundation for the incubator, and the next thing we're going to do is put the egg ring assembly onto the base, but first we have to install the floor. I want to talk a little bit more about that. Back to the floor, which was made out of perforated metal. Remember, it had the hole in the very center. It also had 4 holes that appeared to be pushed out from one side, and then one side you can feel the raised sides of the holes. Those need to go up on the floor, not the other way. Those need to go up. They also have to be placed very carefully over these 4 pegs. 4 pegs have to fit in those 4 holes. So I'm going to do this once without the egg ring just to show you. Let's see if I can. There. That floor will be securely in the proper place. You can see the 4 blue pegs through the 4 holes. That ensures that the perforated floor is centered exactly on the base. If it's not, that causes a lot of problems. Later on, when you put the turning ring on, it goes back and forth. It'll snag the edges of the floor, and it would probably burn out the motor in the little egg turning box. So you have to be sure that the blue pegs are showing, the 4 blue pegs are showing through the 4 holes. We're going to, now we're going to thread the wick through the center hole on the floor. Then we're going to set the whole assembly and floor onto the blue base. So the wick, remember the wick comes down from the base of the wet bulb thermometer. It's going through the center hole on the floor. Doris, can you grab it and pull it through? Okay, there we are. We've now placed the wick through the center hole in the floor. It looks like that. Now, here, this part can be kind of tricky because we're trying to get this wick into this groove in this compartment, because this is where we're going to put the water bottle. The water's going to be entering here. It's going to be coming through that hole. We want the wick right here, if we can get it here. We want the wick lying flat on the floor, so when the water gurgles out and gets in here, the wick touches the water, and once the wick gets completely wet, it will wick the water up to the bulb or the wet bulb, and that's what we want, because that's going to give us the wet bulb temperature that we're looking for. I'm going to use another blue base without a floor that has the egg ring assembly to show you what that should look like. Remember now, we don't have the floor in place, but can you see where we have the wick? The wick has to be in this compartment. Looks like a slice of pie. It needs to be flat on the floor, and it needs to be going over to that hole where this socket is, because that's where the water is going to be coming in. See, later when we get a water bottle, turn it upside down, the water is going to gurgle through this socket out this hole. We want the wick there where it'll hit the water. The wick's going to get wet all the way to the bulb. You're going to ensure that it gets wet by spraying it with a water bottle or using maybe a water dropper. Be sure the water gets wet all the way to the bulb. Once you've done that, the wicking action, the evaporation action of the water, likes to keep pulling the water from this area through the wick to the bulb, and that's what we want to establish, a wicking action that's going to keep the bulb wet. At the same time, not too much water where the humidity gets too high in there. So we normally will not flood more than one, maybe the next compartment, but not more. I wanted to point out that there are little gates or openings between each pie-shaped compartment. This gate, it actually opens all the way to the base of the floor, which means that once water gets in this first compartment, it can quickly flood this next compartment, because there's not much, the gate is very, very short, if any at all. But then if you look at the next gate to the next compartment, the gate is a little higher. That means the water level has to be higher before it can spill into this compartment. Then again, here it has to be even higher to get to the next compartment. In Southeast Texas, we don't need to provide water in all these compartments, because that would be way too humid. In April and May in Southeast Texas, our air has a lot of humidity in it already. So normally, we're only going to be flooding 1, maybe 2, if we have a dry humidity day here, compartments of water. If you've flooded more than 2 or 3, that means you've released way too much water into the blue base, and that's kind of a bad thing, because you have to take it all down, dry it out, turn the nut back a little bit, and do it all over again. Again, the trick is going to be to turn this blue nut at the exact place where it will release water, just enough water over a continued period of time to keep the wick wet, to keep the water wicking to the wet bulb. But at the same time, you don't want to release too much and flood too many trays. And that takes a little practice. So we want you to start trying to do this several weeks before you get your eggs. Because depending on the location, actually depending on the humidity and the weather conditions around here at the time, it could take a little work to get it the way you want it. Okay, we're going to try to get the floor in place and at the same time get the wick in the position where it's pointing directly towards that socket. So I have the wick where I want it. Now I'm going to turn the floor until I find those little blue pegs. I have one, I have the other, I have the other. Now, can you see the ends of the blue pegs sticking through the holes? When you see that, you know you've got the floor locked in place. You can't see it very well, but the wick is in that pie-shaped compartment, and it is pointing over toward the socket, the little hole where the water is going to come out. That's important. If you don't have the wick in the right place, it doesn't matter what you're doing with the water coming out. The wick never gets wet. You're never going to get a wet bulb temperature because it's going to be dry. You're going to be getting a dry bulb temperature reading just like the one over here. It's measuring the dry air. Someone told me that if you take a flashlight and actually shine through the little perforated holes in the floor, you can see the wick a little bit better. So maybe you can try that if you're having trouble seeing where the wick is, whether it's pointing toward the hole or whether it's lying flat. Sometimes if it's not lying flat, it doesn't pick up enough water and doesn't wick it well to the bulb. Okay, next we're going to place the clear acrylic dome over the blue base in the position that we need it. Notice that there's a knob on this side, a black knob on this side, and there's a black knob on this side. But more importantly, notice inside the knob there's a metal, it's like a bar maybe there, a little metal bar there. It's very important that we get those two little metal bars into a set of these notches on the top of the plastic ring. Remember we talked about those earlier. There's one at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. It doesn't matter which two really, but we have to get these bars into a set of those notches at the top. And once you get it on there, you can almost feel it doesn't seem to be seated properly until they go down the notches. See, they just went down in the notches. See how well it fits on the incubator. At this point, you want to be sure that this acrylic dome can slide freely back and forth on the blue base, because if it's not sliding freely, when we hook up the motor and it tries to move this acrylic dome back and forth, if there's resistance and it can't move it, it'll actually burn out the motor in the black box. Okay, I forgot to show you one thing about the blue base. Inside the groove, this outside groove, where the edge of the acrylic dome is going to slide, there has to be a little Teflon strip. Again, at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Teflon strip, of course, is real slippery, and it reduces the friction of the edge of the acrylic dome sliding in the groove. If you don't have one of these in place, the entire edge of that plastic dome tends to rub on the bottom of that groove. It's much more difficult for the motor to pull that dome back and forth, and the eggs probably won't turn properly, and you probably have a high chance of burning out the motor and the egg turning box. So once again, check and be sure there's a little Teflon strip at least 4 places in that groove. If there's not, you can call us. We have a supply of them, and we'll send them to you just like a piece of tape. You cut it off, stick it in there.